Thank you so much for choosing to stay with us here. It's the last meeting between, we are the thing standing between you and the beer and the live music and all that. So thank you so much. Before we start, how many of you have Azure or Office 365 deployed? All right, most of you. How many of you are still using ADFS for single sign-on for authentication?
1, 2, 3. Stay strong.
All right, cool. And then anybody here from Identiverse 2020 when we had a deep dive virtual talk with my friend Luis? No? All right, cool. So there's not a lot of repeat then. So my name's Ramiro Calderon. I'm a principal product manager in the Azure AD engineering team. I've been working in this space for a number of years, and we have our partner in crime here.
Thank you, Ramiro. So my name is David Gregory, and I'm a principal product manager on the Azure AD product group as well. And so we wanted to kick this off by telling how we got here. So if I go back about 10 years, at the time I was working in Microsoft services. And so my job is to go help customers deploy stuff. And so I found myself in the rare position of deploying ADFS every week. And it usually started very simple. Can you help me stand up a couple ADFS servers and a couple web application proxies? And then the next request was, can you help us onboard Salesforce or some other SaaS app? And then usually 3 months later, they'd call me back, hey, can you help us onboard the next app? And it was just kind of rinse and repeat for several years. And in 2017, late 2016, early 2017, those same customers I helped deploy ADFS were now calling me to say they were deploying Office 365 and Azure AD, and they wanted me to help them migrate those apps from ADFS to Azure AD. And so Ramiro and I put our heads together at the time to come up with, can we help customers accelerate that journey? And so we started a skunkworks project, if you will, to build a tool to help customers really analyze their apps, to say, are they compatible with Azure AD? Can they be migrated to Azure AD? And we published that to GitHub back in probably 2017, 2018. And so since then, since 2017, we've now been on a journey to figure out what's going to help that long tail of customers migrate to Azure AD. And so that's part of our goal here today, is to talk about that long tail and talk about the learnings and the improvements and investments we've made over the last 5 years. Okay? So, agenda for today. Oh, skipped the lead.
Wrong button, sorry.
Agenda for today. We're going to talk about some latest trends of Azure AD versus ADFS, and how we see customers moving, and what motivates customers to move. We're going to talk about some tooling, some investments we're making to accelerate that journey. And we're also going to talk about some partnerships, because when customers go on that journey of modernization and consolidating their applications in Azure AD, it's not just ADFS apps, it's the entire estate of apps, right? Legacy apps, homegrown apps, line of business apps. So we'll talk about some partnerships. And then lastly, we're going to talk about a really interesting case study of a customer that's gone through this journey over the last 5 years.
Cool. So let's get started with the latest trends in Azure AD and ADFS authentication traffic.
So every year, customers ask us for an update on, hey, what are the trends on Azure AD versus ADFS? Well, this is the money slide, all right? So, but once again, I love to talk about technology as it changes over time in the history. So we're going to go back once again to like 2013, 2014, when it was things like BPAWS, before Office 365. And so back in those days, Federation was primarily the only game in town. So we saw a lot of customers deploying ADFS. And so that was pretty much all the usage we saw in BPAWS, and was using Federation, and primarily ADFS. But those customers started coming to us and saying, hey, I have to stand up all these servers. The ADFS servers, the web application proxies, the SQL servers. I have to acquire the SSL certificates. and they wanted an easier journey to the Microsoft Cloud. So in 2014, we released password hash sync, right, to make it easier. And so you enable that, and we take a hash of the password from on-prem AD, and we ship it up into Azure AD, and now you can authenticate directly to Azure AD, sans ADFS, right? So then we started to see some traction, customers moving to a cloud-first posture with Azure AD. But then there were certain segments of customers, like financial services customers or regulated industries, that said, I still want authentication to happen on premises, but I don't want ADFS. And so in 2017, we released pass-through authentication. And so this gave them the best of both worlds. I don't need ADFS, but the authentication still happens on-prem, right? So with those two investments, we were like, hey, maybe our job's done. And so what you can see here was that those two key investments did help, right? We saw cloud-first Azure AD authentication really take off. And in 2017, we saw that inflection point of Azure AD authentication surpassing ADFS, and ADFS started decelerating downward, okay? So in the last 5 years, we've now looked at this long tail to say, what is preventing those customers from moving to Azure AD as well? And so we're going to talk also about some of that today.
Yeah, one of the cool things about this is that after we invested in those key capabilities, and some of them to help to migrate, for example, with stage rollout and similar, we got to a point where the regulators, authorities were suggesting to use password hash sync and native authentication over federation. And that was very cool for us to see as we were investing in these capabilities. So these were the trends based on the adoption of the service, but we also have, as we talk to customers all the time, we also learn the trends on why is it that they want to migrate to from ADFS to Azure AD. So we have this marketing talking tracks that we came up when we first develop these capabilities, all around better security or improve productivity or reduce cost. But as we talk to customers one-on-one, we start getting a lot more insights. And as we, especially over the last couple of years, we started to get very interesting insights as to why were people migrating to Azure AD natively. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Being a technologist, I think, hey, if we create these technology solutions, it's going to cause people to change, right? But what we found is that even if we had full parity and we solved those technology challenges, customers still needed motivation. And so when we talked to customers, we wanted to find out what that motivation was. And what we heard from customers resonated with what our theory was, which is reducing costs, improving the experience, and then also just reducing your on-premises footprint. So we did capture some quotes here from customers. We had numerous quotes, but we wanted to share some that we thought were a sign of the times. So in the middle of COVID, one customer said that in the throes of COVID where people weren't in the office and people were getting sick, they just didn't have the bandwidth to support the federation service anymore. They wanted a cloud-native solution and just one less thing to worry about, right? This next one really resonates with me for really big customers because in the days of ADFS, consistent security policies wasn't so easy to achieve. You had different authorization policies on each relying party, and trying to keep those in sync across the different relying parties was not that easy, especially if you have hundreds and thousands of apps. So this customer said with all the emerging security threats, they needed higher confidence that they had uniformly enforced security policies across their apps. And they felt like our Azure AD conditional access helped them achieve that. And then one last one, and this is really my favorite because I think this really embodies what the cloud is all about. They said, ADFS was a neat idea to quickly get to Office 365 6 or 8 years ago, but the speed of innovation in the cloud is so fast nowadays, they just want to tap into that innovation. So
Yeah, and this was one of the interesting ones because a clear example of those innovations that are native in the clouds, for example, all the stuff that we do here in this conference, right? Stuff that we did 2 years ago with FIDO, for example, made it all the way to the product. And now customers who take the time and the effort to do the migration, they get all those capabilities for free. Same thing with the user behavior analytics with identity protection. And all these things, the more applications we have in there are going to benefit from all this natively by just doing the migration. So that's a good segue for the next, which is we have seen a lot of traction, as David was mentioning, by the numbers, but we keep investing because we are after that 20%. We want to make it 10%, 5%, 2.5%, and such. So let's talk a little bit about that. First thing that, and this is literally how we started with David, we started with the cafeteria building 27, trying to figure out how we can create a tool to help customers to dump the configuration of ADFS and analyze the migration. That was all about discovery. Happy to see the evolution and that tool that we started like ad hoc in the cafeteria went all the way and eventually was productized. So now it's available for you if you install Azure AD Connect Health. So what we do there is we take the logs from ADFS and create some reporting so you can see in Azure AD. So this is the Azure AD console, all the list of applications that you have in ADFS, and that helps you to see which ones are having the most traffic. So that helps you to plan, ask for money to get the migration going and such. We took it forward, and now we create another version of another script that hopefully will take it as well more seamless over time. But we also take all the configuration of the authorization rules, the rules for issue the claims and all that, and we give you a report that says this application is ready to migrate. This other application, there are things that you need to revisit or adjust so the migration effort is going to be different. So this is very important in some customers. The discovery itself was a project. That's why you ended up thinking about how we solve that problem.
When we started building this, we had this pipe dream of like the easy button, like this big easy button, and just migrating apps. And what I didn't fully recognize until a few years later was the power of discovery. Because many of these customers didn't know what they had. And if you don't know what you have, then you can't really build a plan to go and execute on it. And so just a simple action of doing discovery brought enough clarity that they could build a plan, get funding, get the head count. And so don't underestimate the power of discovery. And we encourage you to get Connect Health for ADFS installed today. And we'll talk more about that later on.
Yeah, I remember one customer, we run their report, and I think 30% of the apps were just dead, just sitting there, but there was no traffic, and there's no effort to do there. So this is all goodness that you can unlock. So now let's talk a little bit about the long tail investments, right? Where were like those, when our tool reports some effort needs to be done, change. So we keep investing to make it even faster and faster.
So 5 years ago, like I said, we started looking at that long tail, what's it going to take to get customers to move their apps and the authentication to Azure AD? So we went down this journey of prioritizing features and categorizing features. We really broke it into 3 different buckets. First, we had the kind of service level features. These are things like certificate-based authentication that we just released into public preview a few months ago, right? Or other things like blocking legacy authentication. ADFS had that forever. We released that back a few years ago. Or auth hardware tokens. So there's like these core fundamental service things. And we started this journey at this layer back several years ago to build these features. But then we started thinking at a higher level. Okay, what about protocol-specific features? And so these are things that are relevant to SAML, like SAML request signature verification. That's going into public preview literally this week. SAML token encryption. That's now GA as a few years ago. So we're kind of working up this stack. And so now we move into the application dependencies, and what we found is that the long tail, a lot of it was coming from this right here. And so for the last 12 months, we've been building all kinds of new features that are now in some stage of public preview or GA to address the long tail. Things like regex, transforming claims, group filtering, persistent name ID, multi-value attributes, multiple instances of apps. We find this a lot with like Box, AWS. So we think that, collectively and specifically with, this top layer that we can hopefully address that last 20% in long tail.
Yeah, a great example was literally this morning I was talking to a customer. They said they have like hundreds of Amazon subscriptions, and they were saying that we can't move that because we take the name of the group on-prem, and then we do a regex to strip out some of the naming convention, and that is what makes it to AWS. So this is a perfect example of the investments that we're making to unblock most of the customers. Because this is a typical use case that we were really looking forward to unblock.
Now, something else we did when we started going through this exercise is we created a dedicated engineering team in Dublin. So we have a dedicated team sitting in Dublin. I meet with them 3 times a week to figure out, okay, what are we going to build next? And so that's part of the reason we're here, is to learn from you, is what's preventing you from moving? What can we do to help you move those applications and authentication? So last thing we want to say is we have a lot more in the pipeline, including some tools to make migration a lot easier. So stay tuned, not just discovery, but actual migration, so stay tuned. All right?
Yeah. Wink, wink.
Yeah, wink, wink.
All right,
Exactly.
so this is an example of one of the customers, and just to give a sense of how we operate, we work very closely with the customers. So the list that you saw here is a result of us understanding what was blocking customers and prioritizing based on what the customers actually need. And this is a case where we had a customer that was having a lot of developers kind of doing their own thing and using their own identity systems because they didn't have the flexibility to issue all the claims. So with all the aggregated set of capabilities, especially the ones on top that you were mentioning, they have this cool quote where they say, our developers have complained about the inability to customize claims in the portal, which has slowed down our transition to Azure AD. I'm happy, well, he's happy, we are happy, because all these features will kill all these discussions, and we can start pulling all of our developers to move away from other IDPs and use Azure AD, and that's an auto manufacturer in Europe. So they had a lot of the applications that were having this one-off, changing the format of the claims or transforming on the fly, the things like that. So this is just one example of how customers will take this private preview in the earlier stages and help us to mature the product and get all the way to what we build.
Yep. So when you think about modernization and moving applications to Azure AD, we have a couple options. But I want to take you through the journey of how you should approach this. So number one, if there are any net new SaaS applications that are using standard protocols, then those should be going to Azure AD first. Right? So we say stop the bleeding. So no applications at ADFS, new applications going to Azure AD right out of the gate. Right? Then you're going to start evaluating your existing apps to say, okay, can I move these? And of course, if they're on ADFS, they're likely going to support things like SAML and OIDC. So you should definitely start using things like Connect Health to analyze and prioritize those. But many times, like I said, when customers embark on this, it's like, let's modernize the whole application estate, like everything, legacy apps, on-prem apps. And so that's where our app proxy comes in, which is very similar to the ADFS web application proxy, right? So we can do things like Kerberos, can do things like SAML. But what we've learned from talking to customers is that even the app proxy is not the silver bullet. It doesn't solve the long tail of all the legacy protocols, right? And so that's where our secure hybrid access partners come in to fill that gap. And they can take an application that either we don't support or can't be integrated for one reason or another and bridge those applications back to Azure AD. So you can get some of those same benefits like conditional access, passwordless, on the application that knows nothing about the cloud, right? And so I noticed there were 3 of our secure hybrid access partners here at Identiverse this week. We had DataWizza, which I see in the audience there. Thank you. We had Silverfort, and then there's Silverfort. Thank you for coming. And then, of course, Strata. I don't know if anyone here's from Strata. So definitely think about this more holistically. Of course, Azure AD first, app proxy next, and then secure hybrid access partners to fill that gap to bring those applications into Azure AD.
I always love the demo with the customers where we take the intranet site that they wrote back in 2008 and see it going all the way with passwordless. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And blows customers away. All right, so let's keep going here and go to the last stretch with the customer case study, which kind of summarizes all the stuff that we talked about, but at a large scale. So this customer is a global company, and they had presence, obviously, all over the world. And they had a very large and very complex geo-load balanced ADFS farm. So they were able to take all those apps and move them out of ADFS into Azure AD. So just to give you a sense of the magnitude of the deployment here, we're talking about 13,000 relying party trusts. And in 5 years, was it?
5 years.
5 years. So if I do the math correctly, it's 215 apps.
216 applications per month, which the most aggressive migration I've seen is about 60 a month.
Yeah, I remember when we first run the tool like that, when we wrote the script, timed out, because we couldn't parse all the configuration. But they were able to pull this off. In 5 years, they took all those applications, including 60 claims provider trusts, where basically we're doing a federation with other company, and we had to kind of reimagine how those relationships were created in the Azure AD B2B collaboration and external identities capabilities. We also had to take a look at all the rules that they had and map them to conditional access policies, authorizations policies, assignments, and such. And we were able to pull that off. And as a result of that, we shut down the farm that just was 100 servers, including ADFS servers, plus web application proxy, plus all the SQL servers. And since they were geo-load balancing, they had to come with some sort of highly redundant geo-load balancing capability on top of that, plus a bunch of operational tools to keep that farm up to date with all the configuration across all the nodes of the farm and such. And that was very, very helpful for us to see how they migrated all of that. And kind of the main benefit that they were after, that was, again, back to what really motivates the customer, was to go passwordless. They really wanted to get out of that password surface area and bad experience, and basically they just leapfrogged the experience there. And from the one of the cool things that also we need to think about when we position these migrations with customers is we bounce into a better state. So for those 60 federation trusts that they had to go with claims provider trust and certificates and all that, they move to the new paradigm with Azure AD, external identities, that brings the governance all just built in because it was part of the service right there and then. So not only we migrated the applications, but we bounced into a way better state for them. So if they can do it.
On the day they shut off their ADFS farm, they sent us a picture of the 404 error.
Forgot about that. That's literally when you hit the ADFS endpoint, that's literally what they have now. So,
and to give you some context, we ran our tooling against MSIT's ADFS farm. And at that time, that was around 3,000 applications. And so when we talked to this customer with their 13,000, we honestly thought it was insurmountable. And I'm still incredulous that they were able to pull it off in 5 years. So I guess the moral of the story is, if you can find that motivation, whether it's better security, better experience, cost reduction, and then make a plan and just commit to it. It's not going to be easy, but this customer has proven that it's possible.
Right, and if you want to replicate what they did, probably 200 apps per month or whatever your deployment is. We have go-dos for all of us. So tomorrow, let's start getting that discovery going. Enable Azure AD Connect Health so that those agents go on and start parsing the configuration as you get that discovery going. Later on that, as far as the stage, start looking at if you only synchronize your users that are using Office 365 in Azure, just take the next step and synchronize all the users so then you are preparing for your applications. Start with the easy SaaS applications. They have a great documentation, experience, integration with our gallery and such. And then in the meantime, start learning the rest of the capabilities on Azure AD. For example, my customer took advantage of all the governance features where right there as a cloud service, they don't have to deploy anything in addition to the effort of migrating the apps. And then 6 months from now, X months from now, just start executing that burn down list going and however apps a month you set yourself the goal to do, and then that really helps you to get going.
So, our last slide was going to ask you to come over and talk to us at the booth, so we could learn from you what's preventing you from moving from ADFS to Azure AD. But then we realized it's Thursday, it's 5 o'clock. The booth doesn't exist anymore. And so
maybe booze, but not.
We did create a form that we still want to hear from you. We want to learn, what's preventing you from moving your apps or authentication to Azure AD. So we did create a form here. Go Azure AD. You can fill it out. It asks you whether we can contact you, and we'd love to talk to you. And we are right on time. Let's go party.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
If you have questions, feel free to come. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.